She kissed him first. That was the part Amara could never explain afterward. Not to herself, not to the silence of that hallway, not to the ultrasound photos still warm in her hand. Nia didn't wait, didn't hesitate. She walked straight into Taejun's office, lifted onto her toes, and pressed her mouth against his like she'd been practicing that moment for years. And Taejun, the man who had once told Amara that loyalty was the only currency that mattered in his world, didn't pull away fast enough. Amara stood frozen outside that half-open door with two blurry black and white photos tucked against her chest. 2 heartbeats. 2 lives she hadn't told a single soul about yet. She never said a word. She just stopped breathing, turned around, and walked back the way she came. If you've ever loved someone so completely that their betrayal didn't make you scream, it just made you go completely quiet, then you already know exactly where this story is going. Stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will shake you. And if this story finds you tonight, do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop your city or country in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. These stories don't come twice. The morning Amara Brooks found out she was pregnant, it rained in Seoul without warning. She had been standing in the bathroom of the penthouse on the 43rd floor, the kind of bathroom that had heated marble floors and a freestanding tub that cost more than her first car back in Atlanta. She hadn't eaten breakfast yet. The Tess sat on the edge of the sink while she counted ceiling tiles and tried to remember how to breathe like a normal person. 2 lines. She sat down on the floor, just sat down, right there on the marble, and pressed both hands flat against her stomach. She wasn't crying. She was doing that thing people do before they cry, where everything goes very still and your body is trying to decide whether this is the kind of news that breaks you open with grief or breaks you open with something else entirely. It was something else. She was 31 years old, 4,000 miles from the city where she grew up, married to a man whose name made other powerful men look away first. Kang Tae-jun. The name itself carried weather. She had learned that in their first year together, the way a room shifted when he walked in, the way conversations adjusted their trajectory. She had married him anyway. She had married him because underneath all of that, in the late hours when the empire went quiet and it was just the two of them eating takeout on the kitchen counter, he was the most honest person she had ever met. Brutally, sometimes painfully honest. But honest. She thought about calling him right then, telling him over the phone. She decided she wanted to see his face. That decision cost her everything. She called Nia on the way to the hospital to confirm the test. Nia Carter had been her best friend since the 3rd grade. Since the year Amara's mother got sick the first time, and Nia had shown up at her front door with a grocery bag full of snacks and a pink blanket and had simply announced that she was staying over. They had grown up sharing everything, dorm rooms, heartbreaks, the specific grief of watching your parents age faster than you expected. When Amara had told her she was marrying a Korean organized crime boss and moving to Seoul, Nia had asked 3 questions in rapid succession. Does he treat you right? Does he make you laugh? And is he actually handsome, or are you just saying that? He is, Amara had told her. He genuinely is. Nia had hugged her at the airport so long that Taejun's security team had grown visibly uncomfortable. On the phone now, Nia's voice was warm and immediately excited. Wait. Amara. I know. You're sure? I'm on my way to confirm, but Nia, there were 2 lines, clear as anything. Nia made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, the kind that could only come from someone who had watched you survive enough hard years to understand exactly what this meant. He's going to lose his mind, she said, in the best way. That man is going to absolutely fall apart. Amara smiled at the rain against the car window. I want to tell him in person. I want to see his face. Obviously, you're going to the penthouse after. He has that thing with the council this afternoon, but I'll catch him after. I'll bring the ultrasound photos. Text me the second you tell him, Nia said. I want to know everything. Amara said she would. She didn't know then that Nia already knew she was coming. The confirmation took 40 minutes. The doctor was unhurried and kind, a woman who had been practicing for 30 years and had the particular calm of someone who had delivered every kind of news imaginable in that office. She confirmed what the test had already said. She added something else. Twins. Amara sat with that word for a full minute before she could respond. Twins. She turned it over in her mind like an object she hadn't seen before, checking its weight. Her grandmother had been a twin. She remembered being told that as a child, some distant family fact she had filed away and forgotten. It didn't feel forgotten now. The doctor gave her printed copies of the ultrasound. Two small gray shapes, blurry at the edges, curled close together like they had already decided to look out for each other. Amara held those photos the entire ride to the penthouse. She was not nervous. That surprised her slightly. She had expected some version of fear about what this meant for his world, his name, the dangerous geography of the life they'd built together. But she felt something closer to certainty, like the decision had already been made in some deeper part of her, and her body was only catching up. Taejun would want this. She knew that the same way she knew his coffee order and the specific silence he went into when something was actually bothering him rather than the performance of bothering. She knew him, and she knew this would change something in him. Not break it, open it. She had seen the way he watched children in restaurants, the way he never rushed them when they were loud and slow and taking up space the way children do. He watched them with a careful attention that he didn't allow himself in any other direction. She thought about that in the elevator up to the 43rd floor. She was still thinking about it when she heard voices through the office door. The door was not fully closed. That was the thing. A centimeter gap, a sliver of light and sound. And Amara was about to push it open when the voice stopped her. It was Nia's voice, which made no sense. Nia was in Seoul. She'd arrived 3 days ago for what she'd told Amara was a work trip, something vague about a consulting contract she was pitching to a company in Gangnam. They'd had dinner 2 nights ago, laughed until the table shook. Nia had asked about Taejun, how things were, whether the pressure of his expanding operations across Asia was affecting things at home. Normal questions, friend questions, but Nia's voice was coming from inside Taejun's office. And Nia's voice was not asking questions. Amara stood still. She heard Taejun say something low that she couldn't parse. Then Nia laughed. Not the full laugh Amara knew, but something softer, private. The kind of laugh that isn't performing for anyone. Then quiet. Then the sound that would detonate every certainty Amara had built over 3 years. She pushed the door open 1 more inch. She didn't mean to. Her hand moved without permission. And through that inch of open space she saw, not an argument, not a business meeting, not anything she could have assembled into a tolerable explanation. She saw Nia lift onto her toes. She saw Taejun's hand rise, not to stop her, not fast enough to stop her. And then they were kissing, right there, in the middle of his office with the city of Seoul stretching gray and massive beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her husband, her best friend. The ultrasound photos were still warm from her coat pocket where she'd been holding them all the way across the city. She stepped back from the door. Her back hit the wall of the hallway, and she stood there for what felt like a geological span of time. Mountains forming, eroding, reforming, while actually only seconds passed. Her lungs had stopped consulting her about breathing. Her hands were shaking in a way that had nothing to do with cold. She did not go back in. She did not scream. She did not do any of the things she would have predicted for herself in that scenario, if she had ever been cruel enough to imagine it. She stood in that hallway and heard, leaking through the same cracked door, the sound of other voices joining. Executives, she recognized 2 of them, members of the inner council that Taejun had built his empire's legal face around. And those voices were not being careful. One of them said her name, Amara. With the particular weariness of a man discussing a logistical inconvenience. Another said, "She doesn't belong in this seat." Never did. You know what she is to these families? An outsider, a liability. A third, quieter. If he's serious about the succession, this can't continue. She has to go. And then a voice she almost didn't recognize, measured, almost gentle, that turned out to belong to Nia. "Don't worry. I've been handling it." Amara's hand was still pressed flat against her stomach. She turned around and walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She wrote it down 43 floors. She walked through the lobby past the security desk where the day guard nodded at her the way he always did. She walked out into the Seoul afternoon. The rain had stopped. She didn't take a car. She walked 4 blocks before she understood that she was not walking toward anything, just away. Then she stopped on a sidewalk outside a pharmacy, in the particular anonymity of a city that didn't know her name, and she looked at the ultrasound photos one more time. 2 shapes, curled toward each other. She put the photos in her coat pocket very carefully and made a decision so quietly that it barely registered as a decision at all. It arrived the way the most permanent decisions do, not like a storm, but like weather that has already changed without announcement. She was going to protect them. That was all. She didn't go back to the penthouse that night. She checked into a business hotel in Mappo under a name she'd used once before for a work project, a leftover habit from her years running security consulting contracts before she'd met Taejun, a life that felt like it had happened to someone standing slightly to her left. The room was clean and impersonal, the way business hotels are designed to hold people who are in between things. Amara was very much in between things. She sat on the bed and looked at her phone for a long time. Taejun had messaged twice. The first message was routine, something about dinner, whether she'd eaten. The second, 40 minutes later, carried a different weight. Shorter, more direct. You okay? He could always read temperature through text. It had unnerved her at the beginning of their relationship. It felt like something else now. She typed back, I'm okay. Late errand. Don't wait up. The lie came out cleaner than she expected. She looked at it for a moment before she sent it, the way you look at something you've never made before and aren't sure you recognize. She sent it. Then she called her cousin in Atlanta, Denise, the one who knew how to keep a secret the way other people keep receipts, carefully and without comment. She didn't tell Denise everything. She said she needed to come home for a while. She said things had gotten complicated. She said she needed to not be found for a bit and asked if Denise understood what she meant by that. Denise, who had grown up in the same house and understood entirely, said, I'll make up the room. The divorce papers took 11 days to arrange through an attorney she'd found independently, a woman who had handled 2 prior cases involving international marriages with Korean nationals and who asked no unnecessary questions. Amara paid the retainer in cash from an account she had maintained quietly in her own name since before the wedding. Not because she had ever planned for this, but because her mother, who had been through 2 marriages of her own, had once told her, keep something that's only yours. Not as a threat, just as a fact. She had listened. She signed the papers in a coffee shop in Mappo on a Tuesday morning with a green tea she didn't touch, sitting across from the attorney who witnessed her signature and said nothing except, I'll file these today. Amara nodded. She went back to the penthouse that afternoon to collect what mattered. She had given herself 1 hour. She used 40 minutes. She took her passport and the documents that were hers. She took a photograph of her grandmother that had sat on the bedroom nightstand since she'd arrived. She took the winter coat she'd bought herself in her first year in Seoul, before Taejun had started insisting on covering everything. She left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, not as a statement, not as a message. She left it because it belonged to that life and she was stepping out of that life, and you don't take with you the things that belong to where you've been. She stood in the kitchen of the penthouse for approximately 30 seconds after setting the ring down. She looked at the counter. The ring caught light from the window in the way expensive things do, carelessly. She picked up her bag, and she left. She did not leave a note. She thought about it on the flight to Atlanta, sitting in economy with her coat folded on her lap and the ultrasound photos in her wallet. She had imagined several versions of a note over the past 11 days. Angry versions, dignified versions, one that was only 2 sentences, one that asked questions she already knew had no answers worth having. In the end, she left nothing, because there was nothing she needed him to understand that he hadn't chosen to understand already. The ring would say enough. The absence would say the rest. She looked out the window at the clouds below the plane and thought about the 2 shapes in the ultrasound. She hadn't named them yet. She wouldn't, not for a while. But she spoke to them in her head sometimes, in the specific one-sided conversation of someone who has decided to be responsible for another life and is still working out what that means. I'm going to do this right, she told them. Whatever right looks like. We'll figure it out. The plane crossed the Pacific. Amara Brooks, who had once walked into one of Seoul's most dangerous empires and come out 3 years later quietly carrying its heirs, turned her face toward home and let herself, finally, in the dark and hum of a pressurized cabin over the water, cry. Not for him, for the version of the morning she had planned, the joy she had carried across that city, the face she had expected to see when she showed him those photographs, that specific imagined face, soft and off-guard and completely his, the one nobody else got to see. She cried for that. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand, reclined her seat 2 inches, and slept for the first time in 11 days. Taejun found the ring on a Wednesday. He had come home late, later than usual, which for him meant past 2 in the morning, which meant the penthouse had been dark and quiet for hours before he walked through the door. He didn't turn on lights when he came in at that hour. He knew the layout of that space the way soldiers know terrain, by muscle memory, by the specific distance between objects that his body had recorded without being asked. He moved through the dark kitchen toward the refrigerator, and his hand brushed the counter, and his fingers touched something small and cool and perfectly round. He picked it up without looking. He held it in his palm for a moment before he understood what it was. Then he turned on the light. The ring sat in the center of his hand. White gold. Simple band, no stone. She had told him when he proposed that she didn't want something she had to worry about. She wanted something she could keep on her hands while she worked. He had respected that. He had found the best goldsmith in Seoul and described exactly what she'd asked for, and watched the man work for 3 days. He stood in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, holding her wedding ring, and the silence in the penthouse was a different kind of silence than the one he'd left. He checked the bedroom first, then the bathroom. Then, with a deliberateness that was starting to feel like something else, not yet panic, but panic's older, colder sibling, he went through every room in the penthouse with the specific attention of a man who has spent 20 years reading spaces for threat. Her passport was gone. The photograph of her grandmother. The coat she'd bought herself in their first winter together. The one she'd refused to let him replace because she said it still had good years in it. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He was still holding the ring. He called her phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her voice, unhurried. "You've reached Amara. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." He didn't leave one. He called again. Voicemail. He set the phone down on the nightstand and looked at the wall across from him for approximately 2 minutes. Then he picked up a different phone, the one that wasn't registered to his name, and called Ryu Songmin. Songmin picked up on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping. Songmin almost never slept between midnight and 4. It was one of the things that made him valuable and also occasionally unsettling. "She's gone," Taejun said. A pause. Not a surprised pause. A thinking one. "How long?" "I don't know. Some things are gone. The ring is on the counter." He corrected himself. Was on the counter. Another pause. Then, "Do you want me to find her, or do you want to know why first?" Taejun looked at the ring in his hand. "Both. Give me until morning." He didn't sleep. He sat in the kitchen and drank 2 cups of coffee he didn't taste and watched the city outside the windows go from the particular black of 3 a.m. to the particular gray of 5. And he ran the past 2 weeks through his mind with the methodical brutality he applied to every problem that actually mattered, looking for the thing he'd missed. There had been something, 3 nights ago. Amara at dinner, quieter than usual. He had asked if she was tired. She had said yes. He had accepted that without pushing, because he respected that she was allowed to be tired without owing him an explanation. He had thought it was tiredness. He thought about that now, about the specific quality of her quiet that night. His jaw tightened. Nia called him at 8:45 in the morning. He almost didn't answer. Something moved in him when he saw her name on the screen. Not suspicion. Not yet. Just a low-grade friction he couldn't account for. He answered anyway. "Have you talked to Amara?" she asked. Her voice was worried in a way that sounded right. Measured concern, not performance. But Taejun had spent 2 decades in rooms with people performing the correct emotion, and he had developed a finely tuned instrument for the difference between real and practiced. And that instrument was running quietly in the background right now, taking readings. No, he said. She hasn't answered my calls either, since last night. A pause. Taejun, I have to tell you something. I didn't want to be the one to say it, but I've been worried for weeks. She's been pulling away. I thought it was just stress, but I found some things when we were together last week. Messages on her phone. I wasn't snooping. She left it open and I saw another pause. And this one was the kind that people use when they're making themselves continue through something difficult. She's been talking to someone back in the States. I don't know who, but it didn't look like nothing. Taejun said nothing. I'm sorry, Nia said. I should have told you sooner. I just kept thinking it wasn't my place. Send me what you have, he said. I took a screenshot. I don't feel good about this, Taejun. She's my best friend, but you deserve to know. Send it. He hung up. The screenshot arrived 6 minutes later. He looked at it for a long time. Messages between Amara and a number he didn't recognize, a 404 area code, Atlanta. The messages were intimate without being explicit. The kind of intimacy that's worse than explicit because it implies history, inside jokes, shorthand, the particular language of people who know each other in their bones. He put the phone face down on the counter. He picked up his coffee. His hands were completely steady. They were always completely steady. It was something people noticed about him, that no matter what was happening, his hands didn't shake. He had trained that out of himself at 19 years old, and it had never come back. He drank his coffee. Then he said very quietly to the empty kitchen, "All right." That was all. Sungmin came at 10 with a folder and the particular expression he wore when he was delivering information he already knew Taejun wasn't going to like. He sat across the kitchen counter and spread 3 pages of printouts between them without preamble, because they had worked together long enough that preamble was an insult to both of them. She filed the papers Tuesday, Seongmin said. Attorney named Park Ji-yeon. 2 prior cases involving international marriages, no flags. She used her own account to pay the retainer, account she's had since before the marriage. Taejun looked at the papers. She's not in the country anymore, Seongmin continued. Flew out Thursday evening. Economy. Atlanta routing. Did you track? She was met at Atlanta by a woman named Denise Brooks, cousin. They left the airport together. After that, nothing. The cousin's address is in Decatur. I can have someone at the door in 18 hours. No, Taejun said. Seongmin looked up. Not yet. He picked up one of the pages and looked at it. She planned this. Yes. For how long? Account activity suggests she's been maintaining independence for at least 2 years. Small amounts, consistent. Not hiding it, just separate. Taejun set the page down. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite anything. Not anger, not hurt, not the cold assessment mode that people who worked for him knew to be afraid of. Something in between those things. Something he dealt with by becoming very still. Nia sent me something this morning, he said. Seongmin's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightening. Taejun noticed it and filed it away. Screenshots, he said. Messages between Amara and someone in Atlanta. I see. You don't look surprised. I'm not paid to look surprised. I'm paid to tell you what's true. A beat. Do you want me to verify the screenshots? Yes. Seongmin nodded and collected his pages and stood up. At the door he paused, which he almost never did. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, I've been watching that household for 3 years. I've never seen anything from her side that looked like what those messages are suggesting. Taejun said nothing. Seongmin left. The Mafia Council met that Friday, as they did every second Friday of the month, in a private room on the 31st floor of a building that on its exterior presented itself as the regional headquarters of a mid-size import-export company. The men who gathered there were in their 50s and 60s, with the particular bearing of people who had accumulated enough power that they had stopped needing to perform it. They wore good suits without thinking about them. They arrived without assistance. Taejun sat at the head of the table, because that was where he always sat. Elder Choi opened, as he always did, with a review of the quarter's numbers. The legitimate side, the property holdings, and the shipping interests, and the 2 hotel chains in the process of acquisition. The numbers were strong. They were always strong. Taejun had a talent for making money move that even people who resented him acknowledged without comment. Then the business shifted, the way it sometimes did in these rooms, toward the personal. "We heard about your wife," Elder Park said. He was 71 years old and had the appetite of someone who had been patient his entire career and could afford to be patient indefinitely. "A difficult thing." "It's a private matter," Taejun said. "Of course." Elder Park's hands rested flat on the table. "We only raise it because of the timing. With the Huang family's proposal still on the table, Director Huang's daughter has expressed interest. It would be a stabilizing alliance at a moment when stability serves everyone here." Taejun looked at him. "You're suggesting I replace my wife before the divorce is finalized." "We're suggesting," Elder Choi said carefully, "that the transition, when it occurs, be handled with the family's interests in mind. The Huang connection would open 3 provinces that have been resistant. Practically speaking, Taejun said, in the specific quiet tone that stopped rooms, "this conversation is premature." A silence, the kind that had texture. "Naturally," Elder Choi said. "We merely wanted to ensure you knew the option was there, at whatever pace you determine appropriate." Taejun looked down the table at the assembled faces and understood something, not for the first time, but with new clarity, that these men had never been entirely comfortable with Amara. He had known that abstractly, the way you know weather patterns exist without thinking about each individual cloud. He was thinking about it differently now. The timing of Naya's call, the timing of this suggestion, the very managed quality of Elder Choi's reassurances. He said, "Who recommended Nia Carter's consulting contract to the Gangnam firm?" The question landed in the silence like something dropped from a height. Elder Park's expression did not change. It didn't change with a very specific effort that told Taejun more than any answer would have. "I'm not sure I understand the connection," Elder Choi said. "I'm not sure you need to," Taejun said, and moved on to the next item on the agenda, and said nothing more about it for the rest of the meeting. But the instrument was running, and it was no longer taking quiet readings. Seongmin's verification of the screenshots came back in 4 days. He came at night. He sat down across from Taejun without spreading any papers this time and said, "They're altered." The room was quiet. Outside, Seoul was doing what Seoul did, the constant low machinery of a city that never fully stopped. "The metadata on the original image file doesn't match the timestamp on the conversation shown," Seongmin continued. "Someone with technical competence, above average, not exceptional, rebuilt those screenshots from separate source material. The phone number traces to a prepaid SIM purchased in Atlanta 11 weeks ago, 1 week before Nia Carter flew to Seoul." Taejun looked at him. "The messages themselves were assembled," Seongmin said, "cut from other conversations, some of them older. The one that looks most damning, the one with the shorthand, the private references. I tracked 2 of those phrases to text exchanges between Amara and Nia from 2 years ago. They were talking to each other. Someone lifted the language and recontextualized it." The silence in the room changed quality. "I should have moved faster on this," Seongmin said. "It wasn't an apology. It was a statement of professional assessment." "You moved at the pace the evidence allowed," Taejun said. His voice was very even. That evenness cost something that didn't show on the surface. "There's more." Seongmin placed 1 page on the table. Surveillance log from the building. Thursday evening, 5:42 p.m. Nia Carter badged into the 43rd floor using a guest authorization that was issued by Executive Lee from the council office. She arrived 11 minutes before you did that day. Taejun went completely still. Thursday. That had been... He worked back through his schedule. Thursday, he had left an early meeting, come back to the penthouse between 5 and 6 before a dinner at 7. He had arrived and Nia had been there already, saying she'd stopped by to drop something off for Amara, that they'd just missed each other. He had thought nothing of it. Why would he have thought anything of it? Nia was Amara's closest friend. She had a building pass. Her presence made complete and unremarkable sense in the frame he was given. She set the scene, he said. Yes. For what? Seongmin was quiet for a moment. Not because he didn't know the answer, because he was choosing how to deliver it. I don't know yet what Amara saw or didn't see that afternoon, but the timeline suggests she may have arrived at the penthouse around the same window. Her access card was used at 5:51, 9 minutes after Nia. Taejun stood up from the table. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room and looked at the city. She came to the penthouse, he said. His voice was not a question. Her card was used, Seongmin said carefully. There's no footage inside the private corridor. As you know, those cameras were disabled per your own security protocol 18 months ago for that wing. She came to the penthouse and she saw something. That's the most probable reading of the sequence. And then she left and filed for divorce 11 days later and didn't say a word. Seongmin said nothing. Taejun pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass. The city below was indifferent and enormous, and entirely unaware of the specific shape of what was collapsing in this room. Find out what she actually saw, he said. I'm working on it. And find Nia's connections to the council. Not the consulting contract, deeper. How long, how far back, what she was given, and what she was asked for. He turned from the window. His face was the particular kind of controlled that is indistinguishable from calm if you don't know how to read the difference. Seongmin knew how to read the difference. I want to know who built this. Every name. Understood. And Seongmin. The tone shifted fractionally. Not louder, just denser. Find her. Amara had been in Maine for 6 weeks by the time she understood it was where she was going to stay, at least until the twins came. She had not planned Maine. She had been in Atlanta for 3 weeks, folded into Denise's spare room with its faded curtains and the sounds of the neighborhood she'd grown up adjacent to. The early morning trash trucks, the kids on the street after school, the specific texture of a life that hadn't waited for her to come back to it. She was grateful and she was restless, and the combination was making her difficult to be around, which she could see in the patient way Denise made extra coffee in the mornings and didn't ask how she was sleeping. She wasn't sleeping. The pregnancy had entered the phase where comfort was purely theoretical, and she was carrying 2 of them, and at 22 weeks her body had made clear that it had its own agenda now, and she was largely along for the ride. The doctor she was seeing in Atlanta was good, careful, thorough, the kind who called to check in between appointments. But Atlanta was too close to everything she was trying to clear her head from. The people who knew her here knew her history, and she wasn't ready to be known yet. The main idea had come from a property listing she'd found by accident at 2 a.m, somewhere between not sleeping and trying to. A rental in a small fishing town on the coast. Reasonable monthly rate. Quiet. The listing description used the word peaceful 3 times, which would normally have put her off. People who over-advertise peace are usually selling its absence. But she had clicked through and the photos showed a small house with a porch facing water and a wood stove in the kitchen. And something in her that had been braced hard against the world for 8 weeks released a single notch. She called the number on the listing at 7 a.m. The woman who answered was in her late 60s, Amara guessed from the voice. A particular New England directness that didn't waste warm-up. Her name was Ruth. She asked how long Amara needed the property. Amara said she wasn't entirely sure. Ruth said that was fine. She could do month to month. She asked if Amara was coming alone. Amara said it was just her. Ruth paused very briefly and said, "The nearest hospital is 40 minutes, in case that's relevant." Amara realized the woman had registered the pregnancy in her voice somehow, or had made an educated guess from the hesitation. She said, "I appreciate you mentioning it." "The midwife in town is named Colleen," Ruth said. "She's good. Bring warm layers." Amara drove to Maine on a Tuesday with 2 suitcases, the ultrasound photos in her coat pocket, and a bag of prenatal vitamins she had been religious about since Atlanta. The town was everything the listing had quietly implied. Small, unbothered, a harbor that smelled like salt and diesel and fish, a main street with a diner and a hardware store and a pharmacy that closed at 6. Nobody looked at her twice, which was either because people here were simply not invested in strangers, or because the sight of a visibly pregnant black woman arriving alone had already been filed under Not My Business, which in Amara's experience was the highest form of New England hospitality. Ruth met her at the property with keys and a carrot cake she had made that morning, and the specific practical warmth of a woman who had lived alone for long enough that she knew exactly how to make another person feel that solitude was manageable. They sat on the porch for an hour and talked about the town and the tides, and nothing that mattered deeply to either of them. And when Ruth left, Amara felt for the first time in months something approaching the absence of dread. She set up the spare bedroom with the things she'd need. She made an appointment with Colleen the midwife, who turned out to be 53, efficient, and deeply unbothered by the complexity of twin pregnancies, which Amara found deeply comforting. She started walking every morning along the harbor, early, before the fishing boats fully came in the specific quiet of a place that woke up gradually and without urgency. She did not think about Seoul every day. She thought about it most days, but not every day. That felt like progress. She did not let herself think about Taejun with any sustained attention. She would catch the edge of a thought and redirect it, the way you redirect water. Not by stopping it, but by giving it somewhere else to go. She thought about the twins instead. She thought about Ruth and the carrot cake. She thought about the harbor and the morning light. She did not think about the look on his face that she had imagined for 6 weeks before the real one she'd seen through that office door had replaced it. The package arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Courier, no return address. She almost didn't open it. Something about it, the weight, the deliberate lack of information, made her stand with it on the porch for longer than made practical sense. Then she went inside and opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a single document. No letter. No explanation. Just the document, printed cleanly, 17 pages. She started reading. By page 4, she was standing up, though she didn't remember standing. By page 9, she had her hand pressed flat against the kitchen table, steadying herself the way you do when the floor is reliable but your body has stopped trusting it. By page 17, she had read the same paragraph 3 times without processing it. It was Seong-min's preliminary investigation report. She recognized his format. She had seen enough of his work over 3 years to know the spare, precise style of it. Someone had sent it to her. She did not yet know who. It detailed, in 17 measured pages, the skeleton of what had been built against her, the falsified messages, the council's involvement, the timeline of Nia's access to the penthouse, the name of the cyber specialist overseas who had assembled the fake financial records she hadn't even known existed. There was a note on the final page, handwritten in English in a script she didn't recognize. He doesn't know yet, but he will. And when he does, he will come. She stood in her kitchen in Maine with the document in her hands and the afternoon light moving across the floor, and her heart doing something that wasn't quite any single emotion but contained several at once. The specific voltage of being seen after months of invisibility, the specific chill of understanding how precisely she had been targeted, and underneath both of those, something she was not going to name yet because naming it would require her to make room for it, and she was not ready. She set the document down. She put both hands on her stomach. The babies moved. One of them, the one who was lower, who kicked like punctuation at the end of thoughts that didn't need it. "I know," she said, out loud, to no one. Outside, the harbor was going about its business. And in Seoul, in a penthouse on the 43rd floor, Kang Tae-jun was sitting across from his security commander with a stack of evidence that was dismantling everything he thought he knew. And he had just said a name, her name, in the specific tone of a man who has run out of reasons to stay where he is. Seong-min laid the last piece of evidence on the table at 11:47 on a Friday night, and the room went so quiet that Tae-jun could hear the ventilation system running in the walls. 17 pages. Plus the supplemental file that had taken Seong-min's contact at the digital forensics firm in Singapore 4 additional days to complete. Plus 3 surveillance stills pulled from external cameras, not building cameras, street cameras 2 blocks away, that showed Nia Carter arriving at the building on Thursday evening carrying a bag that the forensic analyst had identified, with high confidence, as containing a laptop and an external drive. Seongmin set a final photograph on top of the stack. It was a screen grab from a private communication channel. Encrypted, but not encrypted well enough, apparently, between Nia Carter and a number registered to a shell account connected through 4 layers of corporate obscuration to Elder Choi's family office. The message was dated 9 months ago. It read, "She's pregnant. Confirmed through her physician contact. Move the timeline up." Taejun read the message once, then he read it again. Then he set the page down with the very specific care of a man who is holding something in with both hands and has no intention of letting it show. "She was pregnant," he said. "Yes." Seongmin's voice was neutral with effort. "Based on the timeline, she would have been approximately 8 to 10 weeks at the point of this message. The council knew before you did. Before she told you." "She never told me." A silence. "She came to the penthouse that Thursday," Taejun said. Not a question. A man retracing a map that has been handed to him too late. "She came to tell me. She would have had the ultrasound by then. That's consistent with the timeline. She would have had something to show me." He stopped. Seongmin did not fill the silence. He understood that some silences are not gaps to be filled, but weight to be held, and he held it. Taejun stood up from the table. He walked to the window. He was not a man who paced. He had trained that out of himself the same year he'd trained out the shaking hands. But he stood at the window for a long time with his back to the room, and the city outside was doing its indifferent nighttime thing, and he pressed his knuckles against the glass until the skin went white at the joints. "Where is she now?" he said. "Maine. Coastal town. Northern section. She's been there approximately 6 weeks. The rental is under her own name. She wasn't hiding. She just went somewhere quiet." "How far along?" "Based on the timeline in the council's communication." Seongmin paused. 28, 29 weeks. If she carried to term, you're looking at another 10 to 12 weeks. But twin pregnancies often— "I know." His voice was flat. He knew. He knew because he had, without ever intending to or admitting why, read extensively about twin pregnancy risks in the weeks after Amara disappeared, in the specific way that people research things they aren't ready to name as fears. He turned from the window. "Get me a flight," he said. "Tonight." "There's nothing direct until—" "Then indirect. I don't care how many stops. Get me there." "And the council meeting Monday. Cancel it." He was already moving toward the bedroom. "And get me Nia's location." Seongmin straightened. "What do you want to do with that?" Taejun stopped in the doorway. He looked back over his shoulder, and his face in that moment was something that Seongmin, who had worked beside this man for 11 years and had seen him in rooms that would have broken most people, filed quietly in the category of things he would not forget. "Nothing tonight," Taejun said. "Tonight, I'm going to Maine." A set. He landed in Boston at 6:20 in the morning, local time, after a flight through Tokyo and a connection that gave him 40 minutes in an airport terminal, where he sat in a plastic chair and did not sleep and did not eat the food Seongmin had packed and stared at the middle distance with the focused intensity of a man running scenarios. He rented a car himself. No driver, no security. Seongmin had pushed back on that, mildly, in the way he pushed back on things he knew he couldn't stop but felt professionally obligated to note. Taejun had noted the note and ignored it. He drove north for 3 hours. The landscape shifted in a way that was foreign to him in a bone-deep way. Not unpleasant, just genuinely unfamiliar. The specific scale of American open space that people from dense cities always underestimate from photographs. Trees, more trees. Then coast, salt smell even through the closed windows, and a town that appeared around a curve in the road without announcement, a modest cluster of buildings along a harbor, where the morning was still doing its slow work. He parked on the main street. He sat in the car for several minutes. He was not, in this moment, the man who ran an empire. He was not the man whose name stopped rooms. He was a 38-year-old person sitting in a rental car in a fishing town in Maine who had spent the entire overnight flight from Seoul running the calculation of what he had done and what it had cost, and who had paid the highest price for it. And the answer to that last part was not himself, and he knew it, and the knowing sat in his chest like something that had no business being there, but had moved in and was not leaving. He got out of the car. Ruth answered the door of the rental house before he knocked. She had been watching from the window, not suspiciously, just the habit of a woman who lived close to a harbor and monitored arrivals the way coastal people do, with a low-grade attention to what's new in the frame. She saw a man in a dark coat, Korean, well-built, standing at the end of the path with the specific posture of someone trying to look less frightening than they are. She opened the door and looked at him. "She expecting you?" Ruth asked. "No," he said. Ruth considered this. She was 67 years old and had no particular weakness for impressive-looking men. She had a very specific weakness, however, for honesty, which was rare enough in her experience that she recognized it when it showed up. "She's at the harbor," Ruth said. "Morning walk. She'll be back in 20 minutes, give or take." She paused. "You want to wait inside or out?" "Outside," he said. "Thank you." Ruth closed the door. She went back to her kitchen and poured herself more coffee and decided she would not intervene unless something required intervention, and that she would know the difference when it arrived. Thus, Amara came around this curve of the harbor path at 8:40 and stopped walking when she saw him. He was standing outside the house at the end of the path with his hands in his coat pockets, and she recognized him from 200 feet with the specific full-body recognition of knowing someone in your bones, even when your mind needs a second to catch up. She stopped completely. One hand went to her stomach, not consciously, just the reflex that had developed over months, the habitual checking in. She stood there. He didn't move toward her. He stood exactly where he was and let her look at him and make whatever decision she was going to make. She walked the rest of the path. She stopped 6 feet from him because that was the distance that felt survivable, and she looked at his face, and his face looked like someone had taken a version of it she'd known and run it through something hard and returned it changed. "How did you find me?" she said. "Seong Min." Of course. Her voice was level, flat in the way of a person who has been practicing level. "What do you want?" He opened his mouth, then he closed it. Then he said, "I know what happened. All of it. What you saw. What was done to make you see it. Why—" He stopped. "I know about the twins." The word landed between them, and neither of them looked away from it. "You don't get to call them that," she said. "You don't have that word yet." "Okay," he said. "You just— okay?" "You're right. I'm not here to argue about what I have or don't have. I'm here because I need you to know that what you saw was staged, every piece of it. The messages, the bank records, Nia was placed there. She was placed there by the council, with a specific purpose, because they knew you were pregnant, and they knew what that meant for succession, and they needed you gone." His voice stayed even throughout this, but there was something underneath the evenness that cost him to contain. "I believed a fabricated story because my pride made it easier than asking questions I should have asked immediately. That is mine. That is entirely mine. I'm not here to make excuses for that." She was very quiet. The harbor behind her was going about its morning. Somewhere a boat motor turned over. "You think coming here and saying that fixes something?" she said. "No? Then what do you think it does?" "I don't know," he said, and the honesty of it, the bare, unprotected quality of not knowing that she had so rarely heard from him, did something to the air between them that she was not going to name. "Go back to Seoul," she said. "I'll have my attorney contact yours about Amara." His voice didn't rise, didn't harden, just her name, said with the specific weight of someone who is not going to pretend the moment is smaller than it is. She looked at him. "I'm not going back," he said. "Not today. I'm staying nearby. I found a place in town. And I'm not going to ask you for anything, and I'm not going to show up unless you want me to, and I'm not going to make promises because you've heard enough of those. But I am not getting on another plane and leaving you here alone." Her jaw tightened. "That's not your choice." "You're right, it's not. You can call the local police and have me removed, and I won't fight it. I'll go back to the inn, and I'll respect whatever boundary you set. But I'm not leaving the country. Not yet." She looked at him for a long time, long enough that a lesser man would have filled the silence. He didn't. He stood in his inadequate coat in the May morning and held her gaze and did not flinch and did not perform. "The inn on Maple Street is the only option in town," she said finally, in the voice of a person giving information and nothing else. "The owner is named Dale. He'll give you a room if he has one. She walked past him to the front door. She did not look back. But he took the room at the inn. That first week, he did nothing else. He stayed in the room or he walked, and he did not go to the rental house, and he did not call. He bought groceries at the small market on the main street and ate them in the room or occasionally at the diner, where the woman at the counter asked him on the second day where he was from. And he said Seoul, and she said she'd always wanted to see Korea, and he said it was worth seeing, and that was the extent of conversation available to him in that town for several days. On the 8th day, Amara's midwife Colleen knocked on the inn's door. He answered to find a 53-year-old woman with the energy of someone who had been handling complicated situations for decades, and had stopped finding them complicated some time ago. She looked at him the way Ruth had looked at him, directly, without intimidation, with a calculating pragmatism he found unexpectedly steadying. "She didn't send me," Colleen said immediately. "I want to be clear about that. She would be angry if she knew I was here." "All right," he said. "Twin pregnancy, 29 weeks, both presenting correctly, but she's carrying heavy and her blood pressure has been higher than I'd like for the past 10 days. She's managing it. She's being smart about it." A pause. "But she's alone. And this kind of pregnancy at this stage, moving into the 3rd trimester, things can change fast. I don't say this to frighten you. I say it because you're standing in this town for a reason, and I'd rather the reason be useful." Taejun held the door open wider. "Come in." That's what happened in Seoul while he was standing in Maine. Learning the geography of a fishing town came to him in pieces through Seong-min's twice-daily reports. The council had noticed his absence within 48 hours, and the response had been swift and poorly masked. Elder Choi had convened an emergency session under the pretense of a financial review, the real function of which was to begin the procedural work of challenging Taejun's authority in his absence. 3 council members had drafted a preliminary motion. 2 had refused to sign it. The division itself was information. Nia Carter had left Seoul on the same morning Taejun had landed in Boston. Her departure had been orderly. Packed bags, arranged car, no panic visible to anyone watching. But Seong-min had been watching, and the order of her packing suggested advanced preparation of 2 to 3 days, which suggested she had known Taejun's departure was coming before it happened. Someone on his inner staff had told her. Taejun read that part of the report twice, and then sent a single instruction back to Seong-min. "Find who told her and put them in a room until I get back." Then he put the phone face down and went back to the matter immediately in front of him. He had, on the 12th day, encountered Amara at the market. It was not staged. The town was small enough that accident was inevitable. She was standing in the produce section holding 2 apples and frowning at them with the concentration of someone whose attention was elsewhere. He picked up a basket and moved to a different aisle. She appeared at the end of the aisle 3 minutes later and looked at him, and he looked at her, and she said, "You're still here." "Yes." She looked at the items in his basket. The assessment was brief and not unkind. Then she said, "Colleen told me she talked to you." He braced himself. "She shouldn't have done that without asking me," Amara said. "But she was right about what she said." He waited. "I'm not letting you in," she said clearly, so there was no room for misinterpretation. We are not doing a version of this where you show up and the past disappears. That's not how this works." "I know. But you can come to the next appointment, if you want. It's Thursday at 2. She looked away, at the apples in her hand. "They deserve to have their father in the room the first time he hears them. That's not about you. That's about them." She put both apples in her basket and walked toward the register. He stood in the aisle with his basket and his inadequate heart and absorbed that sentence for longer than was dignified. Thursday at 2. Colleen's office was small and deliberately unintimidating. Warm colors, a table with 2 chairs instead of the desk and patient chair arrangement that created hierarchy. Amara arrived first. Taejun arrived exactly on time. They sat in the 2 chairs with a distance between them that was not hostile, just honest. Colleen moved through the exam with the efficiency of someone deeply practiced. She asked Amara questions in the direct shorthand way of 2 people who had established a working relationship, and Amara answered with a specificity that told Tae-jun she had been thorough and careful about this pregnancy in a way that lodged in him somewhere he couldn't quite reach. Then Colleen set up the Doppler. The sound that came through, twice, two separate rhythms, slightly offset, was the most disorganizing thing Tae-jun had ever heard in his life, and he had been in rooms where very serious things happened. He had sat across tables from men who intended to kill him. He had held positions in the face of things that most people never encountered. None of it had done what 2 small heartbeats did in 30 seconds in a midwife's office in Maine. He made no sound. He held everything completely still, the way he always did. But his hands, resting on his knees, one of them closed into a fist, and then opened, and then closed again, and Amara, who was watching the ceiling with her jaw set, turned her head and looked at him. She looked at his hands, then she looked away. The 17th day, Seong-min called with a development that required Tae-jun's complete attention immediately. The council had gone further than the motion. They had contacted a competing family, the Bake Syndicate out of Busan, historically a rival, now apparently useful, and had opened a channel offering a structural arrangement that would effectively replace Tae-jun's authority with a council-governed leadership committee. The paperwork was being drafted. The vote was scheduled for 4 days from now. "If you're not in Seoul Monday," Seong-min said, "it passes, and they have procedural standing to lock you out of the legitimate holdings." Tae-jun was standing outside the inn with the phone pressed to his ear and the harbor in front of him doing its afternoon thing. "And Nia?" he said. "She's in Busan. We think she's coordinating." The connection to the cyber specialist in Singapore confirmed. He's been paid in 3 installments. The last one was 3 days ago. There's a 4th pending, which suggests there's additional work in progress. We don't know what yet. Tae-jun absorbed this. "The legitimate holdings," he said. "If they gain procedural control, the children's succession rights under your grandfather's law become legally contested. The council's legal team has apparently been building a challenge argument for months. They need procedural control to file it." A pause. "If the twins exist on record as your biological heirs, and the council controls the legitimate apparatus when the filing happens, they can freeze succession and litigation for years. They'd attack the children through the courts." That's the read. He was quiet for long enough that Seong-min said, "Tae-jun." "I know," he said. "You have to come back." He looked at the harbor. He thought about Thursday at 2. He thought about 2 heartbeats, slightly offset. He thought about Amara's hand on her stomach and the specific distance between them that was not hostile, just honest, and the possibility, not a guarantee, not yet, not close, that the distance was something that could, over a very long time, change. He thought about what leaving would say. He thought about what staying would cost. "Set up a call," he said. "I need to speak to the 2 council members who refused to sign the motion, tonight if possible. They'll want whatever they want, I'll give them tonight. Get me on a call." He paused. "And I need someone I trust, not council adjacent, completely independent, to be in this town. Close to the rental house, not visible, just there." Seong-min understood immediately. Protection. If the council is building something additional, and Nia is in Busan coordinating, and there's a 4th payment pending to a cyber specialist, I don't know what direction the next move comes from, and she is alone. I'll have someone there in 14 hours. Tae-jun hung up. He stood at the harbor for another minute. He was doing the math that he had been avoiding doing since the plane, the specific calculation of how much could be lost if he moved wrong and in which direction, and what the variable was that he couldn't control. The variable he couldn't control was that the woman in the rental house up the street was 29 weeks pregnant with twins, had blood pressure that Colleen was watching carefully, and did not know that the same people who had dismantled her marriage were now potentially repositioning for a second move. He walked back to the inn. He called Amara's number. She picked up on the 3rd ring, which was not nothing. She could have let it go to voicemail, and they both knew it. "I have to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear it fully before you respond. Can you do that?" A pause. He heard her breathing shift slightly. "Say it," she said. He told her. He told her about the 4th payment, and the Busan connection, and the succession challenge, and what the council's legal team was building, and what it meant for the twins specifically. He told her in the plain, direct way he told people things that mattered. No softening, no management of the blow. Just the information laid out clearly so she could make decisions from a real picture rather than a partial one. When he finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that he checked the phone to make sure the call was still connected. "They were going to do this," she said slowly, "even if I'd never left." Yes, the pregnancy made the succession question live. They would have moved against you either way. Leaving just changed their timeline. Another silence. "So my children," she said, and the word "my" had a specific charge in it that he did not touch, "are a legal target. Currently, not permanently, if I move correctly in the next 4 days, but I need to go back." He stopped. Then, "I don't want to go. I want to be clear about that. I am not choosing Seoul over being here. I am going because not going puts them at risk." The silence this time was different. He couldn't read it through the phone, and it frustrated him in a way that felt entirely appropriate. He had lost the right to read her easily and would have to earn it back incrementally, if at all. "How long?" she said. I don't know exactly. The vote is Monday. If I can fracture the motion before it reaches a vote, I can move faster. If I have to fight it through the vote..." "How long?" she repeated. "A week, maybe less." She was quiet again. "Someone will be nearby while you're gone," he said. "You won't see them. But if you need anything, or if anything feels wrong, call this number." He read her the number Seong-min had given him. "Her name is Ji-won. She's been with me for 6 years, and she will do whatever you need without asking questions or reporting back to me. You're giving me a bodyguard who doesn't report to you. I'm giving you someone trustworthy who works for your safety, not my information. Those aren't the same thing." A very long pause. "Fine," Amar said. "Go deal with your counsel. But Tae-jun..." Her voice shifted in a way he hadn't heard in a long time. Not softer exactly, more honest. "If something happens while you're gone, if something goes wrong with the pregnancy and you're in Seoul, I'll be on a plane before you finish the sentence." She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite not one. "There's a direct flight," she said. "Boston to Incheon, 7 hours shorter than roading through Tokyo." He absorbed that. She had looked up the route. At some point she had looked up the route from here back to Seoul. "I'll remember that," he said. He left the next morning at 5, before the harbor woke up, and the last thing he saw of that town was the window of the rental house, with the lights still off inside it. He was in Seoul by Sunday evening. By Sunday midnight, Seong-min had walked him through everything the council had built, and Tae-jun had made 3 calls and sent 2 messages and begun dismantling it the same way he dismantled everything that threatened what was his. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with the cold, efficient precision of a man who has spent 20 years learning that the most dangerous thing is not the weapon aimed at you, but the quiet work done before anyone announces the war. And in Maine, in a rental house with a wood stove and a porch facing water, Amara Brooks woke at 3 in the morning to something she had not felt before, and lay very still in the dark, both hands flat on her stomach, trying to decide whether what she was feeling was what she thought it was. Amara lay still for 4 minutes before she was certain. The sensation was not pain exactly. It was pressure, deep and directional, the kind that moved in waves and had an architecture to it that her body recognized before her mind caught up. She had read enough in the past months to know the difference between the Braxton Hicks contractions that had been occurring sporadically for 3 weeks, and something that had a different rhythm, a different intent. This had intent. She reached for her phone on the nightstand. 3:17 a.m. She pulled up Colleen's number. The midwife had given her a direct line with strict instructions to use it without hesitation at any hour, and pressed call. Colleen answered on the second ring. She sounded awake, which at 3 in the morning either meant she hadn't been sleeping or she woke fast and clean. Amara suspected both were true in equal measure. "Talk to me," Colleen said. Amara described what she was feeling, the timing, the character of it. She was precise, because precision was how she handled things that frightened her. Not distance, not denial, just accuracy. Colleen was quiet for 6 seconds. Then, "How far apart?" 7 minutes? Maybe 8? Okay. A sound of movement on the other end. I'm calling the hospital. You call the number he left you. Colleen. Amara, call the number, then get your bag and get to the door. I'll have someone there in 10 minutes. The call ended. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. The room was dark and the wood stove had gone low, and outside the harbor was doing its 3 a.m. thing, which was nothing, pure black and salt silence. She put both feet on the floor and stood up. And the second she was upright, another contraction moved through her, and she put one hand on the nightstand and breathed through it the way Colleen had shown her, not fighting it, not bracing against it, moving with it, until it passed. 32 weeks, 8 weeks early. She called the number. Jiwon answered before the first ring completed, which meant she had been awake and watching the phone. Her English was precise and slightly formal in the manner of someone who had learned it as a professional tool rather than a social one. I'm here, Jiwon said. I need to go to the hospital. I'm outside. Don't carry anything heavy. Come to the door. She grabbed the bag she had packed 3 weeks ago. Earlier than recommended, but she was carrying twins and she was alone, and she was not a person who left things undone that could be done. She put on the coat. She picked up the ultrasound photos from the kitchen table where they had been living for the past month beside her keys, and she put them in her coat pocket. She went to the door. In Seoul, it was mid-afternoon. Taejun was in the 31st floor meeting room for the second time in a week, but this version of the room felt different. The same furniture, the same men, the same expensive suits, but the power arrangement had shifted in ways that were visible to anyone trained to read rooms, which everyone present was. He had spent Sunday night and all of Monday morning working the 2 dissenting council members, Elder Huang and a younger member named Director Lim, who was 54 and had built his position on legitimate financial interests and had always had a complicated relationship with the criminal side of the family's operations. Taejun had offered them both something concrete, a restructured council agreement that formalized the separation between the legitimate holdings and the criminal operations, with the legal empire run independently under a board that the council could seat members on but not control. It was a concession. It was also the thing he had been planning to eventually implement anyway, accelerated by necessity. They had both agreed, with conditions, at 2 a.m. Monday. So when he walked into the meeting room Monday afternoon with Seong-min 2 steps behind him, the motion that Elder Choi had spent 2 weeks building had already lost its majority before a single vote was cast. Elder Choi knew it. He was 72 years old, and he had not stayed relevant for 50 years by failing to read rooms. You moved fast, Elder Choi said. He was sitting at his usual position, third from the left, and his hands were flat on the table and his face was the particular flat of a man controlling himself. I always move fast, Taejun said. You've had 11 years to know that. The restructuring proposal you've offered Huang and Lim is done. The paperwork is filed. You're welcome to challenge it through the family's legal channels, which will take approximately 4 years and will require you to explain publicly why you're opposed to separating legitimate business from criminal operations, which I suspect you'd find uncomfortable. A silence. The succession challenge, Elder Choi said carefully, is also done. Taejun set a folder on the table. The twins have been registered as my biological heirs under my grandfather's succession law. The filing was completed this morning through the family's legal counsel, not the council's legal team, the family's, which is a different entity, as the charter has always specified. The council's challenge argument has no procedural standing to file against a completed registration. The silence in the room was the specific silence of a structure that has just discovered its load-bearing wall was removed while it was paying attention to the ceiling. Elder Park said, quietly, "You moved before the vote." I did. That was legal, completely legal. The charter is very clear on timing windows. I know because I had it reviewed 6 months ago, when I first became aware that the council was exploring its options. He looked down the table. You've been planning this for 9 months. I've been planning the response for 6. The difference is, I waited until I had everything I needed before I acted. He paused. You moved too early. That's on you. Elder Choi looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at the folder. Then he looked away, at the wall, at some middle distance that Tae-jun suspected contained a very rapid reassessment. Nia Carter, Tae-jun said. The name dropped into the room like something heavy. I want her brought back from Busan. I want her in a room with me and 2 attorneys, and I want a complete account of her involvement. I'm not interested in prosecution. That's messy and public and serves no one here. I want her account on record, in writing, witnessed. After that, she is done. In every business this family touches, in every city we operate in, she is done. Is that clear? Nobody spoke. Is that clear? He repeated, and his voice didn't rise, but it became something else. Denser, the way pressure becomes density. And 3 people around the table nodded almost simultaneously. His phone vibrated. He looked at it under the table. Ji-won's number. He stood up. This meeting is concluded. Seong-min will handle the procedural wrap-up. He was already walking toward the door when Seong-min called after him. Tae-jun? She's in labor, he said, without turning around. Get me to the airport. Oh. Ji-won's message had been 4 words. Hospital. Now. Come fast. He called her back while Seong-min's car was already moving. How far along, he said. They admitted her 20 minutes ago. 32 weeks, both babies, contractions 6 minutes apart now. Ji-won's voice was steady, but he could hear effort in the steadiness. The OB here is competent. Small hospital, but they have an NICU unit. Colleen is with her. Is she? She's scared. She won't say it, but she's scared. A pause. She asked if you were coming. He absorbed that. Tell her yes, he said. Tell her I'm coming right now. She said. Ji-won paused again, and in the pause he heard something being decided. She said to tell you to handle your business first. Tell her the business is handled. I'll tell her. He hung up. The drive to Incheon was 51 minutes at that hour of the afternoon. Seong-min drove it in 38 and did not comment on the speed or the 3 traffic signals they did not fully honor, and Tae-jun sat in the passenger seat with his phone in his hand, watching the remaining distance close and running the math that no amount of power or preparation could fully fix. The math of biology, of timing, of 32 weeks and 2 small lives making decisions that had nothing to do with what any of the adults in their story had done to each other. The direct Boston flight was 7 hours 20 minutes. He would not be there for the birth. He understood that as a fact, and held it the way you hold something very hot, carefully, without letting it consume your grip, because losing your grip helped nothing. He called Ji-won every 40 minutes for the next 7 hours. Amara had been in labor for 4 hours when the OB, a woman named Dr. Peterson, who was 39 and had the specific efficient calm of someone who had seen every version of this and respected the process without romanticizing it, told her they were going to need to make a decision. The boy was coming. His progression was clear, and his position was correct, and his heart rate was good. His sister was the problem. She had turned. Not dangerously, not yet, but the turn combined with the stress of the contractions was creating a pattern that Dr. Peterson was watching with an attention that Amara recognized as careful concern, trying not to become alarmed. We can continue, Dr. Peterson said. She was standing beside the bed and she was looking directly at Amara when she said it. Not at the monitors, not at Colleen, at Amara. Or we can take them now via C-section. Either path has risk. I want you to make this decision with full information. Amara looked at the ceiling. She was exhausted in a way that had no vocabulary for it. The kind of exhaustion where your body has been working at its absolute capacity for hours, and the work is not done, and there is no version of stopping. Her hair was damp against the pillow. Her hands were shaking, which surprised her, because her hands almost never shook. What does your gut say? She said. Dr. Peterson paused. It was not a pause that hedged. It was a pause that respected the question. My gut says we have a window right now that may not stay open. Then take them now, Amara said. Do it. Colleen squeezed her hand once, just once, and then let go, because Colleen understood that what Amara needed right now was not softness, but steadiness, and she provided it in exactly that form. They moved fast after that. The boy was born at 9:47 p.m. Maine time. He cried immediately, a sound that Dr. Peterson noted as strong and clear, and was placed briefly on Amara's chest before the NICU team took him, and she had approximately 4 seconds to see his face, which was scrunched and furious and perfect, before they moved him and her attention was required elsewhere. The girl took longer. She was born at 9:58, 11 minutes after her brother, which felt to everyone in the room like a very long 11 minutes. She did not cry immediately. There were 14 seconds of silence from that corner of the room that Amara, who could not see clearly from her position on the table, experienced as the longest 14 seconds of her life, longer than the airplane across the Pacific, longer than the hallway outside the office door, longer than any of it. Then a sound, small, not strong, but present. Dr. Peterson said, "She's here." Amara closed her eyes. Colleen said from somewhere to her left, quietly, "Good girl." And Amara was not sure if she was talking to the baby or to her. Taejun landed in Boston at 4:22 a.m. He was through customs in 11 minutes using a diplomatic channel that his attorney had arranged, and Jiwon's contact had a car at the curb when he came through the doors. Jiwon called as he got in. "They're here," she said. "Both of them, boy and girl." Her voice was not its usual precise professional neutral. It was close but not quite. He said nothing for a moment. "The boy is in NICU, precautionary. He's doing well. The girl..." A pause. "She had a difficult first hour. They're monitoring her closely. Her breathing stabilized about 40 minutes ago. Dr. Peterson said she's cautiously optimistic." Cautiously optimistic. He turned those words over in his mind and did not examine them too closely because the examining would cost him something he needed to preserve for the drive. "And Amara," he said, "tired. She's stable. They let her see both of them for a few minutes before they moved them to NICU." A pause. "She's been asking about the girl. Every nurse that comes through the room, she asks about the girl." "I'm 2.5 hours out," he said. "I know. Drive carefully." He did not drive carefully in any conventional sense of the phrase, but he drove without incident, which was the practical equivalent. And the Maine coast appeared in the pre-dawn gray of a morning that was beginning without any regard for what it was beginning into, the way mornings do, indifferent, salt-smelling, already in progress. He found Amara's room at 6:58 a.m. The door was half open. He stopped outside it the same way he had stopped at the end of the rental house path 3 weeks ago, giving her the chance to look at him first, to make whatever decision the moment required. She was awake. She was in the hospital bed with the head elevated and the specific wrecked quality of a person who has just done something enormous with their body and hasn't slept. Her hair was still damp at the edges. She had an IV in her left hand. She was looking at the window, at the gray morning coming through it, and when he appeared in the doorway, she turned and looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. He looked terrible. He was aware of that. 14 hours of transit, no sleep. Still in the suit he'd worn to the council meeting because there had been no time to change. He probably looked like something that had been through machinery. "You made it," she said. "Yes." "The council?" "Handled. Filed the succession registration this morning before I left. It's done. They can't touch the twins legally." She absorbed this. Something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly, more like a held breath released. "Sit down," she said. "You look like you're going to fall over." He sat in the chair beside the bed. The chair was plastic and too small, and he didn't care. "Have you seen them?" she asked. "Not yet. I came here first." She looked at him. Something moved in her face that he couldn't fully read, but it was not nothing. "She had a hard first hour," Amar said. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing her. "The girl. She didn't cry right away, and they..." She stopped. "It was quiet over there, and I couldn't see, and I couldn't..." She stopped again. He leaned forward in the chair. He did not touch her, but he leaned forward so that when she looked up, she was looking directly at him and not at the window. "She's breathing on her own now," he said. "I know, they told me. I know." She pressed her lips together. "I keep asking everyone anyway. Every time someone comes in, I ask again because I need to hear it again. That's reasonable, he said. It's annoying. It's reasonable, he said again. She looked at him. Then she looked at her hands, the one with the IV and the one without. I named them, she said. I didn't wait. I know we hadn't. She paused. I named them while I was waiting for them to stabilize. I needed them to have names. What are they, he said. The boy is Eli. The girl is Sue-Ah. She looked up. Sue-Ah was your grandmother's name. I know you told me that in the first year. I kept it. He looked at her. You don't have to keep it, if it's right, he said. His voice came out lower than intended. It's exactly right. She nodded. She looked back at her hands. I want to go see them, she said, but I need a few more minutes. She exhaled slowly. Go see them, then come back. He stood up. Tae-jun. Her voice stopped him at the door. He turned. She looked at him with the specific directness she'd always had. The thing about Amara that had disarmed him from the beginning, the absolute absence of performance in how she looked at people. Thank you for coming, she said. I mean that exactly as plainly as it sounds. I'm not saying it means anything else. I just mean it. I know, he said. He went to find his children. The NICU was at the end of a corridor, behind double doors that required a nurse to buzz him through after he identified himself. The nurse, young, unhurried, walked him in with the matter-of-fact gentleness that NICU nurses develop because the work demands it. Eli was in the incubator on the left. He was small in a way that Tae-jun had expected intellectually but had not prepared for viscerally. Small with the particular weight of a being that had arrived before it was supposed to and was doing the serious work of being in the world anyway. He was asleep. His hands were curled beside his face. His face, even in sleep, even at 8 weeks early, had an opinionated quality to it. Tae-jun stood there for a moment and did the thing he almost never did. He simply looked, without processing, without planning, without building the next move. Just looked. Sue-Ah was in the incubator on the right. She was smaller than her brother. She had more equipment attached, more leads, oxygen support that the nurse had explained was precautionary and would likely be reduced within 24 hours if her numbers held. She was asleep as well, or as close to it as a newborn in a NICU gets. That threshold state where sleep and wakefulness don't yet have firm borders. Tae-jun sat in the chair between the two incubators. He had been in this world for 38 years. He had built an empire and defended it and lost things and rebuilt them. He had made decisions that most people would not be able to live with, and he had lived with them because the alternative was weakness, and weakness in his world was an invitation to worse things. He had been feared in rooms that people feared to be in. He had believed for most of his adult life that power was the only currency that fully protected the things you valued. He looked at his daughter in her incubator, 8 weeks early, fighting with the specific, uncomplicated determination of an organism that doesn't know it's supposed to need anything other than the chance to continue. He understood something then, not suddenly, not like revelation, more like something that had been building through 17 days in a Maine fishing town, and a 3 a.m. phone call and a council meeting he'd spent 6 months preparing and a 7-hour flight and a drive up the coast in the pre-dawn gray. Something that settled into him quietly without announcement. He put his hand against the incubator glass. Sue-Ah's chest rose and fell. Rose and fell. He stayed there until the morning was fully in the windows, and at some point during that time, the last remnant of the version of himself that had believed control was the same thing as protection finished whatever long process it had been engaged in and went quiet. At 9:15 a.m., a nurse came to tell him that Amara was asking if he was still there. He went back to the room. She had been given something for the pain in the last hour, and she was drowsy with it, fighting the drowsiness with the stubborn, specific energy of a woman who is not interested in losing consciousness when there are things she wants to monitor. "They're okay," he said before she could ask. "Yeah." She exhaled. Her eyes were mostly closed. "Tell me." "Eli is asleep. He looks annoyed about it. Sue-Ah is..." He stopped for a moment. She's strong. She looks like someone who's already decided to do things on her own terms. Amara made a sound that was almost a laugh. She was like that the whole time, always on her own schedule. Her voice was going soft with the medication. I didn't know what they'd look like. I made myself not think about it too hard. It felt like borrowing trouble. He sat down in the plastic chair. She has your jaw, he said quietly. Sua. A pause. Does she? Amara said, and something around the eyes that I don't recognize yet. I'll figure it out. She was quiet for a moment. The monitors tracked their even patterns. Outside the window, the harbor town was going about its business. The fishing boats in and out, the diner opening for the morning, Ruth somewhere probably making coffee and deciding not to ask questions. You can stay, Amara said. Her voice was at the edge of sleep. For today, if you need somewhere to be. He understood this exactly as it was offered. Not more, not less. A day. A plastic chair. The chance to be in the same building as the children he had just met through glass and were already the most important thing he had ever been adjacent to. Thank you, he said. She didn't answer. She was asleep. He stayed in the chair. At 10:43 a.m., his phone showed a message from Seongmin. Nia Carter in custody, Busan. Cooperative. Elder Choi has requested a private meeting. The Baek Syndicate withdrew from the arrangement this morning. He read the message. He turned the phone face down on his knee. He looked at the woman sleeping in the hospital bed, the one who had carried 2 lives across a Pacific Ocean and 7 months of silence and a coast of Maine winter and a 32-week labor alone without asking him for anything, without breaking in any of the ways she would have been forgiven for breaking. The empire could wait. Every single piece of it could wait. He looked out the window at the harbor, at the gray-green water that knew nothing and cared nothing about any of what had happened in the rooms and airports and council chambers and fishing town streets that had led to this plastic chair on this particular morning, and for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, Kang Tae-jun did not have a next move. He just sat there, in the specific ordinary weight of what he'd almost lost, and let the morning continue without him. He stayed for 3 days. Not in the hospital room. There were limits to what the nursing staff would accommodate, and he respected the limits without being asked. But he was there when they opened visiting hours each morning, and he stayed until they closed them each evening, and between those hours he existed in the specific suspended state of someone who has nowhere more important to be and is only gradually learning to recognize that as a condition rather than a failure. Eli came off his monitoring equipment on the second day. The NICU nurse, a man in his 40s named Patrick, who had the particular ease of someone who had witnessed enough of life's extremes that very little surprised him anymore, walked Tae-jun through what the numbers meant in plain language and said the boy was doing what he was supposed to do and probably knew it. Tae-jun looked at Eli through the incubator glass and decided Patrick was correct. Eli had the specific self-possessed quality of someone recently arrived who had already assessed the situation and found it manageable. Sua took longer. Her oxygen support came down in increments. They reduced it the first morning, watched her numbers through the afternoon, reduced it again the second evening. Each reduction was a held breath for everyone in the room. Each time her numbers held, something in the air released slightly and reset. Dr. Peterson checked in twice daily, and her assessments remained what she called cautiously optimistic, which Tae-jun had come to understand was her way of saying the situation was good, but she was not a person who trafficked in certainty before certainty was earned. Amara watched Sua with the focused attention of someone who has decided that watching is itself an action. She didn't say much during the monitoring periods. She just looked with that absolute present tense quality she'd always had, the ability to be entirely in the room she was in, which Tae-jun had once found grounding and now found something closer to humbling. On the third morning he came in, and Amara was sitting up in bed, and Sua's oxygen support was gone. She looked at him when he came through the door and said, "She did it at 4:30 this morning. I was awake." He sat down in the chair. He looked at Sua in the incubator, breathing on her own in the uncomplicated way that would be unremarkable in any other context, and was, in this one, the most remarkable thing he had witnessed. "Were you scared?" he said. The whole time, Amara said. I've been scared the whole time. Since Maine. Since before Maine. She adjusted her position in the bed with the careful deliberateness of a person whose body is still accounting for what it just did. I got good at doing the next thing while being scared. That's all I did. Just the next thing. He didn't say anything. That's not a strength, she said, before he could respond to something he hadn't said. I know people treat it like one. It's just survival. There's a difference. I know the difference, he said. She looked at him. Yeah, she said. I think you do. Mom. Nia Carter's account was delivered to Tae-Jun's attorney in written form, witnessed on the 4th day after the twins' birth, while he was still in Maine. He read it in the inn's small room that evening, after visiting hours, after the drive back along the harbor road that he had now driven enough times to know by feel. He read it in the chair by the window, with the lamp on and the harbor dark outside. It was 31 pages. His attorney had summarized the key elements in a cover note, but Tae-Jun read every page because he believed that the actual words people used when they were finally being truthful told you things that summaries couldn't. Nia had been cooperative, as Seong-min had reported. More than cooperative. She had been thorough in a way that suggested either genuine remorse or the specific thoroughness of someone who had calculated that full disclosure served her better than selective truth, and Tae-Jun was not certain which it was and suspected it was some of both. The account confirmed the architecture of what Seong-min had already assembled, but it added texture that the forensic evidence couldn't. The timeline of her recruitment, 18 months before the divorce, before the pregnancy, when the council had identified Amara as a structural risk to their authority. The specific approach. Elder Choi had reached her through a legitimate business contact, a consulting referral that created cover for the initial meetings. The gradual escalation, first asking her for information about Amara's movements and habits, which Nia had provided, she wrote, because she had told herself it was harmless intelligence gathering, and she had not yet understood where the road she was walking led. There was a paragraph near the middle of the account that Tae-Jun read 3 times. Nia wrote, I knew Amara was pregnant before the council did. She called me from the hospital the day she got the confirmation. She was happy in a way I hadn't heard from her in a while, and I knew that afternoon that what I was doing would destroy that. I told myself I would stop. I told myself that every week for the following 6 weeks. I didn't stop. He set the pages down. He sat with that for a while. The cruelty of it, not the council's cruelty, which was the comprehensible cruelty of power protecting itself, but the other kind, the intimate kind, the kind that requires knowing someone completely and using that knowledge as a surgical instrument, sat in him like something with mass. He thought about Amara at 3 a.m. calling someone she trusted completely from a hospital in Seoul to say she was pregnant, happy in a way she hadn't been in a while, not knowing that the warmth on the other end of that call was already a calculated architecture. He thought about what it cost to trust people that completely, what it cost to be wrong. He did not call Amara that night. What he had read was not his to deliver. It was information that existed in the record, and she would access it if and when she chose to, through her own attorney, on her own timeline. His carrying it to her door uninvited would have been a form of control wearing the costume of concern, and he had spent enough time in the past weeks learning to tell the difference between those two things to know which one this was. He folded the pages. He put them in the folder. He looked at the harbor. Then he called his attorney and told him to begin the process of transferring the council's oversight of the legitimate holdings to the new independent board structure, starting with the 3 divisions that had the most direct connection to the family succession law. He wanted it moving before he returned to Seoul. He wanted the legal architecture of what his children would eventually inherit to be clean and documented and separate from the rest of it before they were old enough to know what inherited meant. His attorney said, "This is going to take time and it's going to face resistance from—" "I know," Tae-Jun said. "Start anyway." He went back to Seoul on the 5th day. Amara knew he was going. He had told her the evening before, in the hospital room, with Eli finally in her arms, the first time she'd been able to hold him, and she had held him with the specific bone-deep care of someone who has been waiting for something for months and is not going to waste the moment by trying to do anything else simultaneously. She had looked up from Eli's face when Tae-Jun said he needed to go back, and she had nodded in the way of someone who had expected it and had not decided yet whether expectation was the same as acceptance. The board restructuring, he said. It'll take 3 to 4 months to fully implement. I'll be back before then. You don't have to give me a timeline, she said. I know. I'm giving it because it's true, not because I think it obligates you to anything. She looked at Eli, adjusted her arm slightly. You can call, she said, about them, if you want to know how they're doing. I'd like that. I'm not... Taijun. She looked up. I'm not making you promises. I need you to understand that. I don't know what this is going to be. I don't know if I'm capable of... I don't know yet. I need time to not know. You can have all the time that exists, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at Eli. Go, she said. Go handle your empire. He left the next morning. He stopped outside the hospital's entrance and looked back at the building for a moment. A specific window on the 3rd floor lit warm from inside. And then he got in the car and went back to Seoul, where an empire was waiting for him to dismantle the parts that were rotten and rebuild the rest into something his children would not one day have to be ashamed of. The meeting with Elder Choi happened 3 weeks after Taejun returned. It was not in the 31st floor room. Elder Choi had requested somewhere private, which Taejun had interpreted correctly as somewhere without other council members present, and they met in a restaurant that Elder Choi had used for private business for 30 years, a place that knew how to ensure a table was not overheard. Elder Choi was 72, and he had shrunk slightly since the last time Taejun had looked at him carefully, the way powerful men sometimes shrink when the architecture of their power shifts. He was still composed, he was still precise, but the particular density of his presence, the weight a man carries when he believes himself to be the most dangerous person in a room, was different now. It had redistributed somehow. He poured his own tea. He poured Taejun's without asking. An old habit. I want to discuss terms, Elder Choi said. I know. The motion failed, the succession registration stands, the board restructuring is moving forward. He set the teapot down. You've won on every front. Yes. So? Elder Choi looked at him across the table. What do you want? Taejun looked at the tea. He picked up the cup. He did not drink from it immediately. He held it. I want your full withdrawal from the operations side. Everything. The criminal divisions, the council oversight of those divisions, the relationships with the Busan families. Clean separation. And in exchange, your family retains its position on the legitimate board, 2 seats, voting members. You'll participate in a real business, operating legally, and you'll make real money from it. Less than you're accustomed to, but money with a longer horizon. He set the cup down. Your grandchildren won't spend their lives looking over their shoulders. That's worth something. You know it's worth something. Elder Choi was quiet for a long time. Outside, Seoul went about its afternoon. You could have destroyed us, Elder Choi said finally, publicly. The evidence your man assembled would have damaged the legitimate holdings along with everything else, Taejun said. I don't burn things I'm trying to build. That's always been the difference between us. Another silence. Nia Carter, Elder Choi said, is done. As I said. She acted beyond her instruction, Elder Choi said. The penthouse. We arranged access. We arranged the meeting, the physical. He stopped. A muscle in his jaw moved. That was her choice. Her initiative. Taejun looked at him. You handed a woman a weapon and told her to solve your problem, and then you want credit for not specifying the method. Elder Choi said nothing. Accept the terms, Taejun said. Go home to your family. Build something legitimate for the next generation. This is the only conversation we're having about this. Elder Choi picked up his tea. He looked at the table. Then he looked up at Taejun with the specific look of a man who has lived long enough to know when something is over. All right, he said. Taejun nodded. He stood up. He put on his coat. Your children, Elder Choi said before he reached the door. Taejun stopped. Are they? They're fine, Taejun said. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. He left the restaurant. Amara let him back in incrementally, the way you reopen something that has been sealed. Not all at once, not with ceremony, just a gradual reintroduction of air. He called every few days, as she had said he could. At first they talked about the twins specifically, Eli's weight gains, which were consistent and pleasing to everyone monitoring them, and Sua's breathing, which continued to normalize until by week 3 it was no longer the first thing anyone mentioned when they discussed her. Then the conversations expanded slightly, the way conversations do when the subject they're officially about provides scaffolding for other things. He told her about the board restructuring. She told him about Ruth, who had come to the hospital with a casserole and had stayed for 2 hours and had held Sua with the practiced ease of a woman who had been a grandmother for 15 years and knew the specific physics of newborns. She cried, Amara said, very quietly. She turned away, but I saw. She seems like someone who doesn't do that often, he said. No, Amara agreed. That's why it meant something. He came back to Maine 6 weeks after returning to Seoul. He called first. She said she would leave the porch light on. He drove up from Boston in the early evening and the porch light was on, a specific warm yellow in the gray coastal dark. And when she opened the door, Eli was in her arms and he was 6 weeks old, and he looked, in the light from the doorway, like the most concrete possible argument for every decision that had led to this particular front door in this particular fishing town. Taejun held his son for the first time outside a hospital room, standing on a porch in Maine while the harbor made its harbor sounds below. And Eli looked up at him with the unfocused gravity of a being who has not yet developed opinions, but is in the process of collecting data. And Taejun looked back and understood he was being assessed and held very still and let it happen. Come in, Amara said from inside. It's cold. He came in. The months that followed were not a reconciliation in the sense that word usually carries. No dramatic moment, no single threshold crossed. They were something more like a slow renegotiation of proximity, conducted in the specific language of practical shared concern for two small people who required things constantly and had no interest in adult complexity. He purchased a house in the town. Not the inn, an actual house, 3 blocks from the harbor, small by any standard he had previously applied to his own living arrangements and completely adequate in every way that mattered. He made the purchase without telling her first, and when she found out, she said, "You bought a house." "Yes." "In this town?" "Yes." She looked at him. Then she looked out the window of the rental house where she was still living, at the harbor, at the specific quality of light that the Maine coast did in the early morning that had been the reason she'd stayed past the original month. Then she looked back at him. "Does it have a wood stove?" she said. "2," he said. She nodded once, which was not agreement to anything specific, but was not nothing. He moved into the house. He hired 2 people from the town, locally recommended, background checked quietly through Seong-min's network, who helped with the things a house requires, and who did not ask questions about the man who had arrived from Seoul and was clearly in the process of something they couldn't quite categorize. The town accepted him in the way that small coastal towns accept newcomers who behave themselves and spend money locally and don't demand to be explained, with a practical, unsentimental tolerance that suited him. He took his presence seriously in a way he had not understood how to do for the previous years of the marriage. He showed up when he said he would. He didn't call for no reason. He was there for the things that needed 2 people and absent for the things that she handled better alone. And over time he developed an accurate map of which things were which and stopped having to guess. Seong-min came twice to Maine to brief him on the Empire's transition, sitting at the small kitchen table in the harbor house with a coffee he drank, without commenting on its quality, in a manner that was slightly adjusted from the Seoul manner. Less formal, not casual, just recalibrated for a different geography. "The criminal operations," Seong-min said during the second visit. "The Northern Distribution Network. We have 2 families asking about succession now that the council's involvement is reduced." "Give them the network," Taejun said. Seong-min looked up from his pages. "Sell it. Whatever the market rate is. I don't want it." He poured more coffee. "The Southern Logistics and the Busan shipping interest, same. Find buyers, keep the legitimate holdings, the hotel chains, the property portfolio, the tech investments. That's what the children inherit. The rest goes." "That's..." Seong-min paused in the way he paused when he was calculating. "That's 60% of the revenue base. The legitimate 60 will grow. It's already growing." He looked at Seongmin. I spent 20 years building the criminal side because that's what I was given and I was good at it, and I didn't question the shape of what I'd inherited. I'm questioning it now. He paused. Eli and Sua don't get to inherit a war. That's the line. Seongmin looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at his pages. Then he wrote something down with the specific air of a man adjusting a plan he had already begun to suspect would need adjusting. It'll take time, he said. I know. Start. But. Amara read Nia's account on a Thursday in February, alone, at the kitchen table of the rental house while both twins slept in the next room with the improbable synchronized commitment to unconsciousness that they had developed in their second month, and that remained, in Amara's estimation, one of the only truly easy things about having two infants simultaneously. Her attorney had sent it, as Amara had requested, when she was ready. She had specified that condition clearly when I asked for it, not before. She had asked for it in February because she had spent 3 months deciding whether she needed the details or just the fact, and she had determined that she was not the kind of person who could build a life on the fact without eventually needing to understand the architecture. She read it in 2 sittings, with a break in the middle when Sua woke and needed to be fed and held and returned to sleep, which took 40 minutes and required Amara's full attention in a way she was grateful for. She went back to the account after, with a second cup of coffee, and finished it. She sat at the table for a long time after. She was not crying. She had cried a great deal in the first months, alone, at night, the kind of crying that has no audience and no performance in it, just the body processing what the mind is not fully equipped to handle without assistance. She had done that work, quietly, in the dark of the rental house with the harbor outside. And she felt the difference now between having cried and needing to cry, and what she felt sitting at this table with the account in front of her was something beyond the crying stage. Harder to name. A specific weight. She thought about the phone call, the one she had made from the hospital in Seoul to say she was pregnant, the warmth on the other end of the line, Nia's voice doing the half-laugh, half-sob thing it did when something mattered. She thought about the 3rd grade, the grocery bag, the pink blanket, the front door. She put the papers in the folder and closed the folder and set it on the table and looked at the window for a while. Then she picked up her phone and called Taejun's number. He answered on the 2nd ring, which she had come to understand was his default, not urgency, just presence. I read it, she said. He was quiet. I don't want to talk about it tonight, she said. I just wanted you to know I read it. Okay, he said. I'm going to be angry about it for a long time, she said. Not at you specifically, just at the fact of it. That she knew and she kept going. That's a kind of thing that it doesn't resolve. I need you to know that. I know that, he said. I'm telling you so that when I'm angry, you don't think it's necessarily about you. I understand. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the harbor was doing its February thing, cold and gray and indifferent in the specific way of New England coastline in winter, which had somehow become over the past months a quality she found clarifying rather than bleak. How's the house? She said. Cold, he said. The north-facing windows need better sealing. I've been told this repeatedly by everyone in town. They're not wrong. No. A pause. How are they tonight? Asleep, both of them. It's genuinely suspicious. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was the version of one that he had, the contained kind that she had forgotten until she started hearing it again on the phone every few days. Should I come over? No, she said. Not tonight, but... She stopped. But, he said, tomorrow they're doing the 1-month development check at Colleen's at 2. If you wanted to be there... The pause that followed was short, but she had learned to read his pauses, and this one was the kind that contained more than it showed. I'll be there, he said. I know, she said. She hung up. She put the folder away in the drawer where she kept things that needed to exist but didn't need to be on the table. She checked on the twins, both still asleep, Eli with his characteristic expression of someone who has opinions about what's happening even in unconsciousness. Sua, with her face slightly turned toward her brother the way she often slept, already apparently committed to the proximity they'd started in. Amara stood in the doorway of the room that had once been a spare bedroom and was now unmistakably the room of two specific people who had arrived early and changed the shape of everything. She stood there for a while and did not think about Seoul or the council or the 31st floor or the penthouse hallway or any of it. She just looked at her children sleeping in the room that she had made safe for them, and she thought about the next thing that needed doing, which was getting enough sleep herself to be useful in the morning. She went to bed. She slept. On the twins' first birthday, in early November, Amara and Taejun brought them down to the harbor. It was the kind of fall day the Maine coast occasionally produced, cold enough to justify good coats, but clear, genuinely clear. The sky a blue that had the particular transparency of autumn rather than summer. And the harbor was doing its best work, the water catching the afternoon light at low angles and doing interesting things with it. Eli was standing. He had been standing independently for 3 weeks, with the specific triumphant instability of someone who has recently discovered a capability and is applying it to every available surface. He held Taejun's hand and regarded the harbor with deep suspicion. Sua was not standing yet. She would get there, Colleen had said, on her own timeline, which was the only timeline she had ever operated on. She was sitting on Amara's hip with one hand wrapped in Amara's coat and watching her brother with the concentrated attention she applied to his every move, as if she were keeping detailed notes. They stood at the harbor in the November light and did not say much, which was not uncomfortable. They had developed the specific comfort with silence of two people who have spent enough time in the same rooms that silence doesn't require filling. Sua turned her head. She looked up at Taejun with the unfocused gravity she'd had since the beginning, and then she reached across the space between them, across the arm she'd had in her mother's coat, just reached, with the uncomplicated physical logic of a child who wants to be closer to something and sees no reason to be indirect about it. Taejun took her. He settled her against his side with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for months, who had learned the specific weight and preference of this particular person and adjusted for it without thinking. Sua put her hand on his jaw. She did that sometimes. Had done it since she was 2 months old. Reached up and put her hand flat against the face above her with the specific investigating pressure of someone confirming a presence. Taejun had stopped being surprised by it around month 3. He stood still and let her. Amara was watching. She was watching with the particular attention she'd had since the beginning, the absolute present tense quality, the being entirely in the room she was in, which in this case was a harbor in Maine in November with the 3 people who had become the load-bearing structure of whatever she was building now in this new geography. She thought about the hallway outside the office door. She thought about the ultrasound photos warm in her coat pocket. She still had them. They lived in the drawer with the closed folder, and she had not decided what to do with them and had stopped feeling like she needed to. She thought about the plane over the Pacific and the dark and the crying that had no audience. And she thought about Ruth's carrot cake and Colleen's matter-of-fact steadiness and Ji-won answering before the first ring. She thought about what it had cost, the specific price of a 1.5 years of her life, the trust taken, the joy deferred, the months alone in a place that was not supposed to be permanent. She thought, it was expensive. She thought, I'm still standing. She didn't reach for his hand. That wasn't where they were yet, and she was not interested in performance. But she looked at him holding their daughter in the November harbor light, with their son gripping his other hand and regarding the water with continued suspicion, and she allowed herself to feel the specific weight of what was present rather than what was absent. It was not nothing. It was, in fact, considerably more than nothing. Taejun looked over at her. She looked back. Eli said something that was not a word yet, but had the conviction of one, directing it firmly at the harbor. And Sua turned to look at him with her researcher's attention, and the harbor received Eli's pronouncement with perfect indifference, and Amara laughed, a real one, the full kind, and even Taejun's contained version arrived, and for a moment the 4 of them stood at the edge of the water in the ordinary light of an ordinary afternoon and existed there completely, without history pressing in from behind, without the future requiring anything yet. Just that. Just the harbor. Just November. Just this. The most feared man in Seoul, who who had once believed that power was the only thing worth building and that love was a variable to be managed, stood on a pier in a fishing town in Maine, holding his daughter's weight with the specific careful attention of someone who has learned at significant cost that the things worth protecting are never the things that announce themselves as valuable. They announce themselves differently. They reach up and put a hand on your face in the cold harbor light, and they look at you, and you hold still. That's all. That's the whole of it.